Welcome to the Matthew Moran podcast. Here you will find a series of in-depth conversations with the world's best nature photographers, filmmakers, conservationists, editors, writers, and publishers. You will get an insight into the lives of creative professionals and industry experts, what goes on in their minds, how they approach their work, and how they make it pay. The podcast also looks at the role that photography and filmmaking plays in helping to raise awareness about the global plight of species, and despite the depressing statistics, we look for solutions at what we can all do to contribute to conservation. All my guests give up their precious time and are incredibly generous of spirit. So this is my chance to share these conversations with you. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hello, it has been a very long time since my last podcast, and I would like to apologise. I somewhat underestimated, again, how long and what an incredible amount of work our Kickstarter campaign was. And so for those of you who backed us and are listening now, I can take this opportunity to say thank you again. What an incredible success it was, and we're still really overwhelmed. And we've been working hard in the background on putting the design together, and we're really excited. That's going to be wrapped up in the middle of January. It then goes to repro at the end of January, and then to print in late February. So we're really excited about that. Hopefully, COVID withstanding, we should be on for our launch date on the 1st of May. So that's what's taken over, I'm afraid, but I'm really excited to be back. And I have a very exciting and very special guest. It's Suzi Eszterhas. I'm a big fan of hers, followed her work for years. She's an amazing wildlife photographer. She focuses on telling intimate stories, documenting young animals and family life in the wild. And she's published more than 20 books and had features and cover stories in over 100 magazines. So she has a vast amount of experience. You are going to really enjoy this one. And also what I really like about Suzi is her sensitive approach, and it's allowed her to capture some incredible images, unique images. She's got some great access over the years and got intimate shots of newborn tiger cubs at dens and young cheetahs on the African savannah, sloths. She's covered so much, and yes, of course, it does sound like the best job in the world. But Suzi talks openly about the struggles from working her way out of debt to dealing with being a woman in a male-dominated profession. And on this podcast, we've been down that road before, and Suzi provides some new and fresh insight to that and how she deals with it, which is really, really great, and I appreciate her time on that. So I had a great time talking with her. Please share it around and stay tuned for more next year. I've got some great guests lined up, and thanks again for listening. Suzi, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and taking the time. And this is another exciting moment for me, not only to get to meet you, but you are on the other side of the world. It's morning time for you, and you're in California, right?
Yeah, it's foggy and cold this morning.
Foggy and cold. Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's kind of humid and warm. We've got the wrong weathers. You know, I'm in. It should be foggy and cold here in August. But
True.
yeah, great to see you. I've been a big admirer of your work for a long time, and I just want to get stuck straight into what you've been up to immediately, because you've recently come back from, I don't know how many trips you've done to Africa, but you've got all this incredible work with meerkats. So yeah, please tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about that trip and what the motivations were for it, and also, you know, the highs, the lows that a wildlife photographer always have, you know, when they set out on a mission like this.
Yeah. That one, I think the meerkats were really incredible for me because I did do one trip down to Costa Rica during 2020, but I was pretty locked down like everybody else was. My big focus through 2020 was just trying to keep my elderly mom safe. So I was really focused on just laying low. And then besides that trip to Costa Rica in October, it was really hard for me. I think it was hard for all of us to not really be able to to get out, especially those that work internationally and we're used to so much travel. So for me, the meerkats were sort of like breaking out. I sort of, it was before vaccinations, and I just felt like, okay, this can't go on forever, and I need to get out. And there were countries in Africa that were opening up, and then other countries that had never really shut down for tourism. So with all of my projects, since I specialize in baby animals, I'm on call. And so in January or so, I decided, I hatched out a plan with a camp in Botswana called Jack's Camp. And we decided I'd be on call for a meerkat birth. And, I thought, well, it'll happen at some point in the spring. And it wound up happening, 7 days later after we hatched the plan. And I got the call that, this female was heavily pregnant. So for me, it was like the break out of COVID trip. I got to like get back out in the field. I brought my assistant along, who's absolutely hilarious. She's a sloth researcher. She's very entertaining, and we just spend the entire time laughing. So it was really nice to be with her and to be with the meerkats. We had amazing local guides and a meerkat habituator with us. So we were a team of 4. And, there were no guests. We felt very privileged because we were at a beautiful place. And not that there's usually a lot of people there. It's pretty high-end, small place, but there were not a soul. It was just us out with the meerkats. And that was just heaven. So we spent a few weeks with the pups, starting when they were about 2 weeks old and not yet emerged, kind of in this phase that I like to call the peaking phase, and doing a lot of looking and being very curious, and then finally emerging with the mob. And it was a small mob, so it was really nice because we got to know the individual members very well and their personalities, as well as the personalities of these pups. And so it was heaven, just all day, every day with these little creatures that also, I think the greatest thing to highlight is that they don't separate people from their environment. They're so habituated to people, they actually use people as part of their habitat. So meerkats will try to get to a higher point to be a lookout, and they'll try to use the human body to get higher, which is really extraordinary and very touching that these animals feel so not threatened by humans. This is a place where, people are like, well, is that okay that they're on people? And the thing is that these meerkats, they can't ever wander into a village and get into trouble. They're just too far from places like that. So the only interaction they'll ever have with human beings is positive, and it's monitored by the guides. So there's no like, people can't misbehave and try to touch these animals. So they literally they'll run over your boots, they'll climb on you to get higher. And there's something very endearing about animals that trust people enough to do that we just sort of disappear. We become invisible. We're like a termite mound to them, essentially, is the way I like to explain it. So that's like, the very touching part. And there really weren't many downsides. I think the downside to that trip is the floods. We had this catastrophic rainstorm where they got a third of their rainfall in one evening.
My
And all
goodness.
the roads washed out. And so
Did you think it was
we were,
the wildlife photographer's curse that you showed up and then they have these floods that they've never had before?
well, yeah, I mean, we kind of thought, well, this is kind of unlucky, but at the same time that, we just thought, okay, so we were driving out to the general area where the meerkats were. And when the floods occurred, we couldn't do that anymore. And so we just said, okay, well, how how far is the walk? We'll just walk it. And so we walked, 20K a day, which is not that long, but when you're walking through mud and water up to your knees and you don't have rubber boots, which was, rookie move. We didn't have rubber boots. It was a lot. So that was the low point. I did wind up getting trench foot, which was also a low
Oh,
point, but very well worth it for the meerkat experience.
yeah. And you mentioned a habituator. What a job title that is. I mean,
It's probably the best job on earth,
can you
being a
imagine?
meerkat habituator.
Yeah, but
Fine.
I find that interesting because that habituator, you can imagine is good at habituating meerkats to his or herself. But when you're new coming into that environment, animals are intelligent, so they will tell the difference between you and that habituator. How quickly was it before they were using you as lookout posts, for example?
They, That's a good point, and I think the adults took a couple days to kind of figure out that Becky and I were just like part of the crew. And some of these adults are so used to using people as termite mounds that they use any person.
Right.
Um, so it doesn't matter who you are, but they definitely are more excessively used to Moto. I mean, undoubtedly, they were always around Moto. Moto would be sitting off to the side, and very often we'd see him with like a meerkat on his shoulder, just resting. Um, so there's definitely that level of habituation with him. And then the pups they did take some time, kind of, you know, they got used to us very quickly. And then what they started, it was more like they just got time. They took time to learn how to use a human body. So within a few days, they figured out, oh, I can use Susie and Becky as a windbreaker, which was very cute. And then they figured out, they watched the adults climb and figured out actually we can climb on people as well. And so they're trying to climb, but of course they're not strong enough yet. So they'd be like slipping off our knees and stuff like that, which is quite charming and quite cute. And they're excessively clumsy because they don't really have all their motor skills yet. So it makes them even more entertaining. But yeah, like full-time meerkat habituator position, I'm not sure it gets better than that.
No, no, it really doesn't. I mean, and they're just such incredible animals. And you've been back, and I've been following. You've been sharing loads of stuff on Instagram and other social media, and it just looks like the most amount of fun. And you've got great content, as far as I'm concerned. Are you happy with the way the shoot went? There's always going to be some story, isn't there, with the wildlife photographer getting trench foot, getting soaked. But are you happy with the body of work that you've come back with?
I am and I'm not. I'm the kind of shooter where I think a lot of people can relate to this. I have a grieving phase that I go through where I grieve the loss of images I didn't get. I'm working on it, spiritually, because it's kind of a pessimistic way of looking at your work, right? But like what I usually find is it takes me a little time. It'll be like a first, the few weeks of just sort of like you remember what you didn't get, what you screwed up or what you missed or whatever. And then it takes, after 2 or 3 weeks, when you look at what you did get in a set, especially as a whole together, then I feel like I move past the grieving phase and I'm like, oh, actually, I got some pretty good stuff. But I'm the kind of photographer where I always I'll acknowledge that I got the good stuff, but I always will at the same very moment acknowledge what I could have done better,
Mm,
and what I would have liked to do. And then always when I leave a trip like that, the wish is I could have spent more time.
sure.
Always, because I never feel like it's enough time with any project. It's like, oh, if I could just have had one more week with that animal or one more month with that animal, then it would have been better. And I think that's just because I crave it. That's my favorite work is when I get to spend really in-depth time with one mother, or as in the case of meerkats, one family, one mom.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. And I think yeah, I understand why you could say that's pessimistic. I kind of go through that after doing long-term projects because you just get so connected. And
Yeah,
it doesn't actually have to be a long-term project. It can just be a few weeks. And
yeah.
there's a completely valid reason for you to mourn that, especially when you're having just such wonderful experiences, and especially doing what you do and what your specialty is focusing on the family. So you're watching these bonds, you're watching small animals grow up. I mean, how can you not get connected on an emotional level as well?
It's so intimate. And, there are times when I'm with, particularly if it's newborns, where, you're in a den situation where, I always think of dens as like a house where you go in and there's a human infant and everything's quiet and hushed. And there's this vibe that's just like calm and zen. And if anyone disrupts that, it's like, get the hell out of my house, mama bear. And that's how these dens feel. These dens, if you have the privilege of being in a situation like that, you just have to, I always try to calm my energy when I go into a den to match the energy of the situation. Because these females, when you're talking about newborns, there's so much peace and there's so much calm, and they're hyper vigilant and hyper alert. So if you go in with this rocked up energy, they can feel that and it feels predatory to them. And so I always just try to bring my energy down and get into a zen place, make my movements really slow, and obviously do simple things like talk softly if you're going to talk. But yeah, you just, it's amazing what you see in these really intimate situations. And some of it is heartbreaking. I've seen babies die on numerous occasions, and it's very emotional and very heartbreaking for the photographer, watching those things happen or documenting those things happen.
Yeah, that's the kind of the not the danger, but the precarious nature of that work, and your focus is, yeah, it's not all happiness and cuteness, and yeah, you have to witness the harsh realities of
Mm-hmm.
of wildlife and the experiences that these mothers go through, and and understanding the ecology and the reason why they have so many, and how it's for the good of the species. I find all of that stuff fascinating, but I think being compassionate towards your subject, again, how couldn't you be? And I think, going back to your focus on young animals, was that something that you set out to do quite early on? I mean, you have an amazing portfolio of different species. I know you've been to Africa, and that's your main focus for many, many times. And India, you've photographed polar bears, but with a real focus on the young. Was this a
Yeah.
conscious decision, or something that kind of happened organically over a long period?
It happened really early. I was one of those really strange kids that knew exactly what I wanted to do. My mom says around age 6, I started talking about wanting to be a wildlife photographer. I watched a lot of nature documentaries, and I do clearly remember telling my parents at a young age I was going to live in a tent in Africa. And my family was not nature or wildlife oriented. So I think everybody was just sort of hoping that I would grow out of it. But my mom was fostering it. She was buying me books. She's the kind of mom that fostered anything her kids were into. So she got me subscriptions to magazines, and I can be, I remember being like 8 and tearing pages out of Ranger Rick magazine of baby wild animals, and sticking them, just covering my walls. So I was always completely drawn to wild baby animals. And then when I started photographing, I got my first camera when I was 6, and I started photographing animals in my backyard. So we didn't really have babies, it was like squirrels and birds. And then I would do my cats and pretend they were like big cats in India, which is hilarious and really dorky, but he's obviously a super cool kid. But I also, later in high school and college, when I did get older and I was able to go out and spend time in nature with some wild subjects, I did immediately start with baby animals. So like harbor seals, the local species that lived around me, I started immediately working with them. So it's always been a thing for me. And I used to not be able to figure, people would say, why baby animals? And I wasn't able to really formulate it. And I think now I what I think what I'm drawn to, because it's way beyond the cuteness, right? Everyone's like, oh, they're cute. But these images aren't just cute, and these moments aren't just cute. It's really like the beauty of the innocence and the vulnerability that really grabs me. And that's a really rare commodity in our society. And especially with certain cultures. And then also, I think the way that we raise our boys, we don't leave a lot of room for vulnerability for men. And I think that it's that innocence and vulnerability that I just find so beautiful, and what I try to capture in my images. And I try to make people feel that. And I think that when people feel innocence and vulnerability, what it does is it opens up your heart. And so, like, even like the most hard hearts, I think if you can put a really innocent, vulnerable, beautiful image in front of them, it can soften them a bit, right? And it can make people care about the natural world when maybe they otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah, I think that's really profound. I really enjoyed hearing that, because you're right. It's when you really think about it, what is it that draws us to cute, fluffy animals, but beyond the big eyes and the soft fur? And you're right. There's that kind of resonance with the vulnerability and the innocence, and just that we have this need to want to protect and look after. And I'm sure this stuff is like hardwired, big eyes, um,
Yeah.
small, vulnerable. And I do often think this. I do wonder, like, what it is. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and we don't have a book that doesn't feature an animal in it, and a cute animal. And there's something that happens to us, like it just becomes I don't know, not cool anymore when you're an adult to be into really cute small animals. And I find that really odd. I grew up with cats and had pet hamsters and stuff, and I loved all of that stuff when I was a kid. Like, why do we only look at that as a childish thing to do? It's like, oh, you kind of grow up and then you'll grow out of that kind of thing. But every message, every kind of story that certainly my daughter is learning about is through animals, and I think we kind of lose that connection as we or society expects us to lose that connection unless we are wildlife photographers, conservationists, or whatever else.
And I think even in the realm of wildlife photography, I mean, one of the things I battled the most in my career earlier is, oh, Susie's just the baby animal photographer.
I can
And I
imagine.
had so many men rolling their eyes at, like, oh, all she photographs is cute, or like, you know, oh, typical of a woman, or that kind of thing. Or, she photographs cute baby animals because, she wants a child of her own, or that. Just,
God.
I mean, there's just so much that I think there, and I always found it, I just marveled at people, not just men, women too, that had this like knee jerk reaction to cute, where just like immediately it was like repulsive to them. And I always marveled at that. Like, how can you find innocence and vulnerability repulsive? And I think it is societal. It's the way that we're supposed to behave as adults, right? You look at the children's magazines, there's a lot of baby animals in the children's magazines. You look at the adult natural history magazines, there aren't so many, or things are, I think, things are changing a bit now, but there used to be not as many. So earlier in my career, I got really, pigeonholed, I think, in a way. And I even had, I remember dating this guy in the business who was like, no, you don't want to be known as the baby animal photographer. Like, and I thought, well, screw you. I'm going to own that. Like, this is me. This is what I do. I'm going to own it, instead of, he looked at it as like, oh, you don't want that. You'd be embarrassed by that, and it's like, no, I'm going to own that. And that's who I am.
And do you think that was because he thought that people wouldn't take you seriously as a wildlife
Yes,
photographer? Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was doing it like looking out for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And
100%.
being hugely patronizing at the same time.
Correct. Yeah. You don't date him anymore?
I'm not surprised. Oh my goodness. So what going in then a bit deeper with that? What do you think it is? Like, you're right. National Geographic Kids, Ranger Rick, they're great magazines, obviously targeted at kids. So do you think there's this kind of, I mean, I don't know. I should ask you the question, really. I'm just trying to figure out the answers, and you probably thought about this a lot more than I have in greater depth, that when we become adults and, okay, I love taking, I've been photographing these foxes for 5 years, and one of the highlights is when the cubs are born and you start to see
Oh,
them
yeah.
like come above ground, and lo and behold, that's what gets the most reaction when I post stuff. Obviously commercially they're really good, but yeah, there's something going on there, isn't there, as adults, that we just can't like channel our inner child into our adult selves and enjoy that as much as we would a kid. Because I often find myself, like, I go kind of crazy around animals, and not just cute ones. Like, I love watching them. I love the sounds they make. It's really primal,
Yeah.
really primal for me. But yeah, not everybody has that, and like you say, not every wildlife photographer has that.
Yeah.
So yeah, what do you have you worked it out? Have you figured it out?
I think it's because, we're very much raised, and I was like this too in school. I got bullied a lot in school. And, this is before they had a lot of awareness about bullying. And I remember, like, my dad was like, you can't show them that you're weak. You can't cry. You have to, if they hit you, you hit back twice as hard. You hit back as hard as you can. And he taught me how to fight. He taught me how to punch. And the next day I went to school and I broke Katie Noble's nose. And, people stopped bullying me after that. And I learned, I show that I'm strong and no one's going to mess with me and my life will be better. And so if somebody hurts me, I don't cry. I don't show that I'm hurt. I don't show that I'm weak. And so I think we're raised in a way to not show vulnerability, to not show weakness, to always be strong, to be tough. And it's way worse for boys. Girls are raised that way in some ways, but boys especially are raised, especially in American culture, to not show vulnerability and innocence. And in fact, if we do show that, we're seen as weak. And I think this spills over on the kind of imagery that we look at as adults, and also right down to the way we value things that kids relate to, right? So, like, I don't think, I don't know if it's the same in the UK, but like in the US, teachers are paid very, very little. Schools get very little funding. Daycare centers, don't get a lot of money. So anything kind of child related isn't really valued by society. Children's magazines will always be seen as sort of less than adult magazines because they're for children. So it's the way I think we view, um, youth and innocence and vulnerability and all those things that come with it, that I think it has all these indirect spillover effects in terms of what we like later in life.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's fascinating, and it's also a great shame. But I
Mm.
agree with you that it is changing, although you kind of question it because of, when you're in your bubble and where you get your news and the friends you talk to. Are we just doing it in the echo chamber? But the the conversation is, the progressive conversation about that, and particularly like you say, men being not afraid to talk about vulnerability, I think that conversation is certainly changing.
Definitely.
Yeah, so it's kind of like with anything, the changes that we need that have been so systemic for such a long time, it's baby steps. Without wanting to say
Yep.
a pun, but it's gonna it's gonna take a long time. And well, I'm glad you're so stoic about it and weren't influenced by terrible boyfriends in the past. And I really enjoy yeah, seeing that work, and not just because it's cute. So please continue.
Thank you.
um I wanted to go back a little bit and talk about yeah, getting the break in wildlife photography, because we talk about it a lot on this podcast, and I think it's even getting harder and harder since I started this podcast. From the days of the 90s, when you had really only a handful of people that were making a really good living from it. So yeah, it would be really good to just hear about your experiences about, my goodness, how the hell do you earn enough money from it? Going to stay in nice places in Africa, buying all the gear, then there's all the software, hard drives, memory cards. The list is endless. Our expenses list is endless. So
Yeah.
how do you go? Well, it's two-pronged question really. It'd be interesting to understand how you uncovered becoming a professional, and then also how you sustain yourself in the current climate.
Yeah. So I think, when I was younger, first of all, I used to have a day job. I had a day job for 6 years. I worked at the Santa Cruz SPCA, which, I was the PR director. So as far as day jobs go, it was a good day job to have, just hanging out with puppies and kittens. Why not? Right. It's better than waiting tables. And so I did that for 6 years. And when I talk to younger photographers, I always say, like, yeah, don't quit the day job, because for me the day job really helped me. There's no way I would have been able to stay afloat without having a day job. Everybody in this business knows you can't just graduate from college and say, oh, I'm going to be a wildlife photographer. So that day job really helped, and I worked my butt off. I was a workaholic for oh god, many a decade. I was really, really, really an extreme workaholic, to the point where, like, I had to, later in life, I had to really reevaluate my priorities and try to find balance. And it was a long spiritual road that I took to try to get some work life balance. And I do finally have it. But I think to make it in this career, you have to be a workaholic. You have to be laser focused. You have to be completely committed to your craft, and not let anyone convince you otherwise. And I think for me, there were a set of things that happened that were really transformative. I think one, I always look at my big break as this turning point where I had, in college, I had had the opportunity to work with a BBC film crew as an informal apprentice kind of thing on big cats in Africa. It was during a semester abroad that I met them, and then I was able to establish a relationship with them, and they're my dear friends to this day. And so I had some experience of being in the bush and operating. Amanda, especially, who was the wife of the team, really helped me be confident as a woman in the bush alone. And then, at the same time, I was working that day job at the Santa Cruz SPCA, and I had brought it down to, I was making some money already with photography, but not a lot. And I was at a place where I was really struggling. I had $50,000 of credit card debt that I had accrued buying these trips to Africa, and also buying my 500 mil lens, which at the time was like a manual focus, like really old. um, and just buying all these expenses, which are, all the gear is really expensive, and there's no way I could have. People say like, oh my god, credit card debt, you had so much of it, but the thing is that there was no other way of me getting this stuff. So for me, this plastic card was like a gift from heaven. And so I had that for 12 years, and I carried around that debt like a ball and chain, and slowly paid it off. But anyway, at that point, I had all this credit card debt. I was still working the SPCA job, and thought, I was feeling very demoralized. Like, I'm never going to be a wildlife photographer. And I was at a really low point in my personal life. I was dating somebody that I should not have been with, that, just 7 years too many. And at this moment, I had, one of the things I'd done when I was in Africa a few years prior is I had met these lodge owners in a place called Ndutu. And I had said, hey, I want to do this cheetah cub project. If you have cheetah cubs, let me know. And they're like, and I said, they have to be like just out of the nest. So like 6 weeks old. And they're like, well, we don't see cubs that little so often, but if we do, we'll let you know. Well, 2 years goes by, and I think that they've forgotten about me. I'm at this low point in my life, and bing, in the inbox comes, hey, we've got cheetah cubs. You should come. You should come now. And I changed my life dramatically. In 48 hours, I quit the day job. I put everything in storage. I drained my savings account. I dumped the boyfriend, and I left. And I went to Africa. And I thought I would be there 2 months. And, I won't go into the long story, but I wound up staying 3 years. And and I was doing weird stuff. Like, I still had the day job in a way. I was sending press releases from the Masai Mara back to the Santa Cruz SPCA, and then my boss would plunk money in my account. And so I worked this way for 3 years. And during this time, I just shot a lot. I just did tons and tons and tons of work. I was already signed up with a really good stock agent, Minden Pictures. So he was already selling some pictures for me, and things really jumped off at that point. I did, after that 3 year stint, I came home. I lived with my mom with 2 duffel bags for years. I was not at all living the high life, but things were moving, things were happening. I was slowly getting myself out of debt, and things just kind of built from there. But had I not taken that really dramatic leap of faith to go to Africa, I don't know what my life trajectory would have been, because I was at an incredibly low place when I had that opportunity. But luckily, I recognized it as an opportunity, not just a risk, but an opportunity, and thought, I just don't really have much to lose at this point. And then, and so things slowly built from there. And the way that I maintain now is, first of all, I have a lot of different sources of income. So I always have all these balls in the air, and so I have my photo tours that I run. I have magazine stories that I do, and I have book projects. And then I do quite a lot of sales of nursery prints. And so all these things will come together so that I can, piece out like a living, essentially. And I'm a small team. Usually it's like me. I have 2 part-time staff members, and I try to keep my overhead really, really small. I rent a house. So I don't have an extravagant living by any means. You can't, where I live in the Bay Area in California. It's expensive. But this all works. But I'm constantly, I think this is one of the big things, is that I'm constant. You have to be able to, this is ironic because I'm not a good multitasker, but I've learned to be. You have to be able to, every day, it's like I work on all those different categories in terms of my sources of income. And so you have to diversify in terms of, being able to make it. There's some people who don't. They make all their money from shooting magazine stories. Those are the really lucky ones. They do like all their income from leading photo tours. Usually I do 3 photo tours a year because I want to have time to do my personal projects like the meerkats, which is what I live and breathe. And you can't do that on a photo tour, right? And I don't want to ever get to the point where I don't have my passion projects, so to speak, because those passion projects keep me going. I still have hard financial times. Last year, I took a big loan out, like I think a lot of people had to if we had the opportunity with COVID. So I still have difficult times. But I never want to let go of what I live and breathe and what my passion projects are, even if they're not making money. So I always operate that I have one passion project every year. It just has to be, because I feel like if I don't have that, I will lose my creative spunk and my creative energy. And with that passion project, it's like I'm doing it whether I make money or not. Like, this is not a money project. This is what I live and breathe and what I love. And so it's funny because everything I do, it's like I make commitments and I'm like, but I'm on call for a birth, and the only things I won't cancel if I'm on call for a birth are photo tours because I can't. But everything else in my life, my family knows, like, Christmas is off the table if somebody gives birth. And that's what keeps me going.
It's funny. You kind of sound like a wildlife photographer midwife. You're on call for a birth.
I know. What's really funny actually is that I shouldn't give away my secrets, but I'm constantly looking at photos of nipples and I'm asking strange men to send me photos of animal nipples all the time.
I bet
Because
you'd be inundated asking for that stuff on the internet. Oh my.
I'm trying to assess whether certain females have given birth or not, or they're close to being pregnant. You can tell by their nipples because they'll get
Wow.
engulfed with blood, and so we can kind of assess how pregnant a female is, or if you look for suckling rings around her nipples. So I'm in a lot of situations where guys, strange men from all over the world, are texting me photos of nipples, or I pull up to like a tourist vehicle. I'm like, did you see, this cheetah? And then, like, did you look at her nipples? And then the tourists are like, what the hell is this woman talking about?
That's hilarious.
It's a weird
Oh my
job.
goodness. Yeah, the things you do, huh? But hey, that's just, it's also fascinating. And I think all of these things, it's great to hear because these tiny, in sports, I think it's called marginal gains. All these tiny little details, they give you this tiny bit of an advantage just to be ahead of the game. Okay, oh, I know, I can tell from that nipple that this mother is nursing, so follow her. And I love those kind of stories. And I also loved hearing, and not in any way wanting to wish ill on a fellow wildlife photographer because they're struggling, but I think it's also just really refreshing to hear because outwardly, depending on how honest you are on social media, and let's face it, we all kind of just want to share like our best work and build audiences and everything else. Behind that, it's a struggle, even for people that have been in the business for a long time. And in fact, often people that have been in the business for a long time because, the payments from picture agencies have plummeted in the last 10, 15 years. The magazine stories, well, they're few and far between. The budgets for those are going down. So everyone's
Yep.
editors' hands are tied. There's so many more wildlife photographers now than there used to be. So it's really, really challenging. And I had a question about, you taking on this debt, which I think is, you saw it as an opportunity rather than a risk, which I think is a great sort of positive mindset. But at what point did you think, okay, did it happen where you said, okay, I don't care how much it's going to cost, I'm going to get into $50,000 worth of debt because this is just what I want to do and I'll figure it out how to pay this money back? Was that your strategy for getting in that debt, or did it just kind of accumulate over time? Or if I just buy this lens, or if I just buy this extra body, how did that kind of
Okay.
manifest?
So it accumulated over time. I did not intend to rack up 50,000. I knew it was going to be a lot, but what I did have all the time is the mindset of I'll figure it out. And I've been quite. This is one thing I'm pretty decent at in life is winging it. Um, like I definitely have that concept of, like, I'll figure it out. Like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go to Africa by myself, I'll figure it out. And how am I gonna eat? I'll figure it out. Like, I just, I have that mentality. It is, though, I will say that it, it can be a little reckless because, and I talk to young photographers all the time. So I am very happy to share my story of the debt, but also like, I don't really want to, I'm not encouraging people to get into a lot of debt or to think I'll figure it out all the time. But the reality is as wildlife photographers, we're not offered bank loans, like banks would laugh at you unless you had, some really good family money or something. Banks would really laugh at you if you asked for, at least in the United States, they would. And so credit cards really, for me, were absolutely the only answer.
Mm,
And I think for a lot of people, there's a liberation that comes with it's okay to have a little bit of debt.
mm,
It's okay because, I think if you go into this field and you don't have family money and you're of the mindset of I'm not going to have debt ever, I'm not sure how you do it.
sure.
I think there are startup costs in any business, particularly this one. And if you don't have investors, then your credit card is your investor,
Sure.
and that's the only way you're going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
So I do think you do have to have a little bit of the "I'll figure it out" mindset. To I was also too. The other thing is, my mom likes to call it stubborn, but I was laser focused. I mean, it was like, I'm not going to let credit cards deter me. I'm not going to let horrible things that people say to me deter me. Like and it was really just coming from a place of following my joy and my bliss. This is what keeps me happy in life. This is what I live for. So I don't care what obstacles come in my way. I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I don't care if I have to live out of two duffel bags in, and be very simple for the rest of my life. Now, luckily, in the end, I don't have to live that simply. And I do have a house that I, pay rent for. But at the time, I was like, I don't care if I'm couch surfing forever.
That is amazing. Yeah, and I
It's
love.
because I love it, right?
Yeah,
So it's really like follow your bliss.
yeah, and I think that's why it's really important and a great message for people who are listening to this and starting out is that there's no compromise. You will do a passion project every year, and I think that's really important because otherwise you lose the reason for why you got into this business in the first place. And I like to repeat this, but a previous guest on the podcast, Eddie Ephraim's, he works with photographers. He's a really good photographer himself. He's an all-rounder, a designer, a bookmaker, and he mentors a lot of photographers who want to make books or a portfolio set of prints, but they don't know how to do it. They're good photographers themselves. And he told me this great thing that most of the photographers the happiest photographers that he works with are the ones that are not professional. And
Mhm.
that's when it can, when you move into the world of it being your living, and I'm the same. I have very many different income streams. It can be stressful, like spinning those plates, and you can end up, and I've had this, you can lose focus on actually just going out and photographing. You spend too much time in front of a computer editing or writing proposals or trying to get sources of funding. And actually what you really need to do, and I remind myself this a lot, is hone your craft. It's a great, a camera's a great instrument that you just continually learn and evolve, and particularly how trends change over the years in our field. You have to have your finger on the pulse, and so practicing. It's like if you want to be a really good guitarist and solo, you got to practice your scales. You got to do the boring stuff. So you've got to just
Yeah.
get out there and keep photographing, and
Yeah.
I think that's where the real currency, the value of it comes when you're describing your experiences with meerkats or the witnessing the vulnerability of these newborn animals that you see. That's the moment that for me you can't put a price on. So you have to keep doing that.
Yeah, and I mean, a perfect world, we do that all the time and we get paid for it, right?
Sure.
And there are not many people who have that. I certainly don't have that. I do a lot of things that, aren't my my first choice in terms of how I make a living and how that income comes in. But I always have the passion projects in addition to those. So I think it's a balance. But yeah, I think you absolutely have it because otherwise, why are you doing it?
Yeah, completely. So you have this specialty or this niche, which is ongoing, and I don't I from what I hear, it doesn't sound like it's this noose around your neck, like you've always got to go out and photograph baby animals. But I think kind of getting into this business, um, it's just so challenging when there are so many people doing it, and every time I go to Wildlife Photographer of the Year, for example, it is, just jaw dropping, the techniques that are being deployed for getting good pictures. But yeah, just in terms of like finding that niche, or finding a subject that hasn't been done before, what would be your thoughts for advice for someone who wants to get into this business, other than don't get into $50,000 worth of credit card debt?
So what I always tell people is that they don't need to find something that's never been done before. Like baby animals has been done for eons, right? And so it's really finding what you're most passionate about and shooting what you love. That's what I tell people. Because as I clearly remember this clear as day, I went to one of my first portfolio reviews with a magazine editor. And she said to me, I picked 40 images that I thought were my best. And I included some landscapes in there because I was told your portfolio should show like, the breadth of your skills and your work, right?
Yeah.
She looked at me and she said, Susie, do you like landscapes? And I said, to be honest, not really. I don't find them as exciting as wildlife. And she goes, well, it shows. So next time you do a portfolio, do not put your landscapes in here. She said, what you love to shoot is always going to be your best work. And that advice I carry with me to this day. And, there are times where I'm shooting things that aren't necessarily my first love. My photo tours, maybe I'm shooting, birds or whatever that, nothing against birds. I love birds, but, not what I live and breathe, not my baby animals. Right. And so, and I'll try to do the very, very best that I can. And I still enjoy it. And that's great. But, the bird on a stick photo is never going to be as good as, my, tiger mom and cub or whatever, because I'm just not feeling it the way I'm feeling it with my baby animal stuff. And what I love is always my best work, hands down. And so I think that's true of everybody in a way. Newspaper photographers and photojournalists are amazing to me because they have to shoot such a wide variety of subjects, often particularly newspaper photographers. They don't know what they're going to shoot until the day of often. And that is always amazing to me to have all those different skill sets. But, I think almost everybody, you can tell their strongest work because it's what they're most passionate about and what they love. And so that's what I always tell people starting out is to shoot what you love. And, if you don't know what you love, try to figure it out. And it's usually people will find it's not, the generalist portfolio that doesn't, make people's jaws drop. That's usually not what they love. They'll usually find out that, it could be very specialized, right? Like Clay Bolt does, nothing but bees. He's incredible, right? And so I think sometimes it's really specialized, and other times it's like, okay, I shoot general subjects, but I shoot in this style or this way. I think there's a real strong emphasis on never been done or never been seen before, right? That's what all the photo competitions are really like. And it's like, you don't have to always shoot something that's never been done. You can take a classic subject and you can do it your way and do it better. I remember when I started, one of my biggest, most in-depth subjects to this day were cheetahs. And I was with Minden. Minden had loads of cheetahs on file, tons. I could have looked at that and said, well, cheetahs have been done, so I shouldn't do it. But I instead decided to do cheetahs, did 18 months with 5 different families and got amazing stuff that people hadn't gotten before because I did cheetahs in a different way than what other people had done before. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents on it.
I think it's brilliant. And was exactly my experience. When I first joined Nature Picture Library back in 2005, I remember meeting Helen, the manager there, and I said to her, like, do you really need more pictures of tigers and polar bears? And she said, of course, like, yeah, they are iconic species and commercially they sell really well. But the demand for fresh images of these species, she said, you would not believe it. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
And like you say, gear has improved, techniques have improved, like showing these animals in a different way, doing it differently, I think is really, really good advice, because I think you're right. Often there is this notion that we need to do something that hasn't been done before. And I think for someone starting out in this industry, it can be probably pretty demoralizing. But I mean, look, I'm photographing urban foxes for the last 5 years, and there have been tons of urban fox pictures. They're all over the place here.
Yeah.
But my hope is that at the end of this work, no one's going to have the same portfolio as me, because I've, slept and breathed these animals, and, become like the specialist of,
Yeah.
and you hope that you saturate, the picture libraries and the magazines and, ultimately books with this work. And so, yeah, I think it is good advice. I mean, on one hand, people going to Antarctica for the first time and trying to sell work, I think it's probably good advice. Hey, look, start local, do something that's close to home and make it accessible, and don't
Yeah.
make it really expensive. But at the same time, and yeah, of course, we have the issue of the climate and the big carbon footprint that we all carry, particularly photographers that travel a lot. You probably will be competing against really, really good specialists of those subjects. So
Yeah.
in that sense, it's probably good to focus on other work. And actually, if you do something interesting and local, which I think, particularly with the pandemic, I don't know about you, but I'm seeing a lot more. And it's going to be interesting to see what comes out in the competitions over the coming years, of people actually being forced to stay at home and photograph their own patch. So have you I know you said you've been looking after your mum, but have you been doing some stuff locally as well when you haven't been able to travel?
I've always done local shooting in between travels. That's something that I've always been passionate about. I did a lot with wildlife rescue over the years locally, and um, that was really great. Last year, I didn't really do much because I was so focused on my mom, and um, I'm really like just, locking down and keeping her safe. This year, I am traveling a lot, but also right now, simultaneously, I'm shooting a story on snowy plovers, which are 30 minutes from
Oh,
me.
cool.
Um, yeah, so I do always have local stuff going on for sure, and I do think that's great advice for a young photographer starting out, and I do tell people about this because when I started, I didn't have, besides the work that I did with the BBC film crew, kind of being an apprentice, and I did get some amazing photos there, but they weren't, story photos. It was just sort of, amazing photos of a lion here and there or a cheetah there and there. And it was just very much beginning. But what I did do in the beginning of my career is I focused exclusively on harbor seals. I can remember being 19 years old and doing 3 seasons of the harbor seal pupping season. And then one of the first portfolios that I showed at a conference, it was to the Ranger Rick editor. It was the first time I met her, and she knew me as the harbor seal girl.
Wow.
And I think that me being the harbor seal girl set me apart from the other photographers that were coming to her. It's like, here's a pretty polar bear, here's a pretty grizzly bear, here's a pretty tiger, right? And it just, you can't stand out. But I stood out because it was like, oh, she's getting harbor seals giving birth, and her stuff is really in depth. I haven't seen anything like this before on harbor seals. So I stood out amongst the crowd, which really I think does help tremendously.
Yeah.
And then there's some subjects too, like sea otters I've worked on for 20 years. And, they're local to me and I love them, and I'll probably shoot them till the day I die. I just love them.
Yeah, they're such wonderful animals, and I guess it's never, you're never going to produce boring work of sea otters. They exhibit so much different behavior. It's incredible. Wow, you're so lucky.
So lucky.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, so lucky.
We have touched on it, quite a few times in the various topics we've talked about already. But yeah, I wanted to ask you, because in the few talks that I've already seen you do, and also your non-profit that you've set up, this issue, which I guess is still an issue about women in wildlife photography, and still encountering, like you mentioned, the misogyny, the sexism, and it sounds like, well, your mum calls it stubbornness, but I just always feel like, again, as a man, I've never had to encounter it because of my gender, but you've had to encounter a hell of a lot of it, and it sounds like you've really turned that into a force for good, not only for your own photography, but setting up this non-profit Girls Who Click for young women in wildlife photography. So if you could tell us a bit about that, it would be great, and kind of the birth, maybe a little bit about your experiences, but then also the birth of this idea and where it's currently at now.
Yeah. So I think, entering this career, obviously, I started about 15 years ago, really sort of, really selling pictures and establishing myself at that time. And it was definitely difficult being a minority in this field. Um, and it was felt, not just in the field, but even in places like conferences. I can remember one of the first experiences I had was being at a conference, and I won't mention any names, but one of the leading wildlife photographers in the world that everybody would know the name in the industry. He, I was already pretty established, and he looked at me, and we were waiting in line for lattes, and he was with his buddies, and I was in line behind, and he looked at me and he said, "Susie, the little girls line is over there." And I remember just being so unbelievably gobsmacked that it happened, that I was speechless and I didn't know what to say. And I was very demoralized by it. And these things continued to happen, where you kind of expect it working in certain cultures, with locals, and where women are not equals. Um, but me being born and raised in the Bay Area, is like I was never treated differently because of my gender. And so when I started entering these situations of, like the old boys club, you walk into a lineup of photographers in Yellowstone long lenses and you're the only woman there. And I didn't really, this was my first exposure to it. And I didn't really know how to react. One thing that I was very good at, excluding that experience, I think, at the conference where I was just too shocked. But I learned very quickly, like the days in my school years where I was bullied, I learned to stand up for
Hmm.
myself and essentially just be like, screw you.
You didn't punch. You
And
didn't
that
punch
was,
this guy in the face and break his nose,
no,
though.
I didn't. I should have
You
punched him
should
in the
have.
face and broke his nose, just like Katie, but I didn't. Um, but I definitely, I would, say, well, screw you, whatever. And that was my way of dealing with it. Screw you. I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing and not let you phase me at all. And I was very tough. I put myself in situations all the time where I was the only woman, and would try to stand as strong as I possibly could. Um, but it was very sort of, in a way, self-focused. It was like not really seeing the bigger picture, just this is happening to me, and I'm just going to have tunnel vision and get through it and establish myself. And then I think when I turned 40, it was sort of like the strange things started to happen. I'd always done a lot for conservation, and I'm really proud of that. But I had never really done anything for like my fellow humans, right? So for like any kind of community kind of work. And I started to feel, I was doing a lot of spiritual work at the time, and I started to feel that I really needed to do something, for people and community. And I also started to really admire the female mentors that I had in the industry, and started to see like the value of that and sisterhood. All these things kind of came together. And then I'll try to tell the story very quickly, but there was
That's
a
okay.
woman who, okay, sorry. So there was a woman who was a newspaper photographer in the Midwest, and she's young. I think she was around 30. She was very brave, and she wrote this blog about sexism in the field as a newspaper photographer and all the patronizing attitudes. She didn't get into the hard stuff like sexual harassment. She was mostly just focused on the misogyny and everything she had faced. And there's a thing called Petapixel. I don't know if you're familiar with Petapixel, but it's got millions of readers. It's a photo blog. Well, they picked up her blog and republished it. And I was alerted to the fact that there was this really great blog post on Petapixel by a friend. She's like, you really should read this because this girl's gone through everything you've gone through. And I looked at it, and I don't know what provoked me to look at the comments because I'm not a comment reader,
Mm.
but I read what she wrote and I looked at the comments and they were horrible. They were like the most sexist comments. Just, I looked at them and I was like, oh my God, are we in 1950? What decade is it? And I got really angry. So I took her post and I posted on my page, on my Facebook. And I said, kudos to her. This girl's so brave. I've been through all this as well. And I just really resonate with this. My followers, these people that I considered, at least Facebook friends and supporters, started making not really outright sexist comments like they had on Petapixel, but lots of patronizing stuff like, oh, women are just so sensitive, and or, oh, this never happens to my wife when I take her in the field, and just, a lot of naysaying and just like, this
Sure.
isn't a problem. And I got really angry and I thought, this is not okay. And I started to see the misogyny as like, okay, different than just screw you, I'm going to keep going. But actually, I'd like to change this. I'd like to do something with, I believe in people can do very small things to make big changes. What is some little thing I can do? And so at the time, I thought, I don't know how I got the idea in my head, but I thought I'll run free workshops for teen girls in Monterey and just try to give some young women the encouragement to come into this industry, pursue a life outdoors, blah, blah, blah. So I did this, and then my female colleagues reached out to me and they were like, this is amazing. You should, if you need help with this, let me know. And then the community support, the boat charter donated it. He was like, oh, you're doing it for free. Basically, everybody was like, I love this. And what I wasn't prepared for is how much I would love it. I go on this workshop. The girls totally inspire me. I was like, I want to do more of this. So in the end, my assistant and I started this nonprofit. She read a book on how to start a nonprofit. So we decided we'll start a nonprofit. And what we'll do is we'll take all of my female colleagues that offered support, and I asked them, hey, would you do the same thing in your communities locally? You donate 8 hours, blah, blah. And they were like, yeah, totally, I would do it. And then Girls Who Click was born. And then we sort of further developed it to have the ambassador program, which is the mentorship. So essentially what we've done is we've created this community of sisterhood for the first time ever in nature photography.
And how long?
And it's
Sorry,
really,
just how long ago did this start? What's the
2017 was
2017?
the year we launched. What's happened is that we've created this community, but what's really a shock is how much this is still happening and the amount of sexism these young women are facing. Some of them as young as 18 years old. In situations where, in professional situations with other wildlife photographers, or with other colleagues that aren't wildlife photographers, but there is still an incredible amount. It's definitely getting better. We have a lot of, particularly some of the younger photographers that are incredibly supportive and inclusive of women. Some of the male photographers have come to us and said, hey, what can I do to help? So now they're on our advisory board. They're doing portfolio reviews for girls. And so it's really, really nice because I feel like we've raised awareness, but more than that, we've created this community where women can come and we can figure out, number one, how do we lift each other up and give women the encouragement to pursue this when they're still a minority? And then also just simple things like, how do you deal with it when men make comments like this? How do you deal with sexual harassment? One of our ambassadors has a previous sexual harassment experience that it will always be confidential with one of the top leading pros in the business that is absolutely horrific. And so this stuff is still happening.
Yeah.
This is current. This isn't 15 years ago when I was getting in. So I'm very, very proud of the work we've done because we have been able to give women a huge amount of support coming into this field. And it's not just this field. We're saying whether you pursue work as like a scientist or a conservationist, and this is just part of what you do. We're just trying to encourage women to choose a life outdoors. So a lot of it is also connecting with nature and getting women the confidence that they need to pursue a life that way.
That's
Yeah.
great. It really sounds like a superb support network. And like you say, you're talking about raising awareness, and there's such a big difference between raising awareness and taking action. So actively
Yeah.
getting girls out, first of all, in nature, because I know that's a big
Yeah.
issue for you as well, like the disconnect. And we can maybe talk about that in a little bit, that disconnect that young people have with
Yeah.
nature.
Yeah.
And secondly, getting confident and working their way around a camera. Yeah, which is hugely important. So
Yeah. And then, working their way around a camera and working their way around men that may not be inclusive or men that might be downright harassing them.
yeah,
you know and I didn't have this kind of support when I got a lot of harassment in situations off. I had one Antarctic expedition where I was one of 12, and I was the only woman, and it was hard. It was extremely difficult for me because I had nobody to turn to. Of like, what do I do when men say this? What do I do when they make me feel this way? And now I think we have some resources of what these women can say when they are being harassed.
yeah, it's horrible. And again, it's like you say, this isn't the 50s. This is 2021, and this stuff's still happening. And I mean, parallel to it is the racism that people experience, and the problem
Oh yeah.
with social media being a platform where you can have this anonymity and just say what you want. And when I hear stories of women being, all the comments, for example, on social media, or the issue in the industry with the sexism, and it's in many ways for me it's kind of funny, not ha funny, but obviously behind all of the negativity, behind all the finger pointing and the harassment, and the little girl's line is over there. What's causing that? And that is, oh, she's a threat because actually she's really good, and I don't want to be threatened by this, so I'm just going to like shut it down. And so much of that, and again with the racism and these people, that behind every criticism is a need. And what is that's the thing that needs a lot more focus on, is where do these perhaps disenfranchised people, or people that just need like better education about these kind of subjects. So we do need to keep the conversation going. We do need to keep the actions going, because we still have such a long way to go.
Yeah, and the awareness I think is really important too, in terms of, we have a long way to go, and sometimes people don't realize what they're doing is incredibly patronizing. A great example, this happens to me to this day. I can't tell you how often I will be in the field working by myself, and someone comes along, a guy comes along, doesn't know who I am, and will show me how I should use my camera. This happens to me all the time still. And then, I try to I'll just say like, yeah, actually I'm a professional photographer and I know how to use my camera. And, and they're usually taken aback, and oh, I'm so sorry. And it's like, it's not even coming from a really bad place. It's just the assumption that they make in their head of a woman doesn't know how to use the camera. And it's this weird thing where they're like trying to be helpful, but also being incredibly judgy and patronizing at the same time, right? So it's like, these aren't bad people a lot of the times, right? And it's just a change of mentality. Can you not do that anymore, because it doesn't make us feel good.
Yeah,
And comments like, your hands are so little, what do you do with them? I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? What do you do with your hands?
oh my god, shit. I mean, yeah, we just don't have any idea really how hard it is not having these experiences and comments. Oh my goodness. I mean, Susie, sometimes
I do want to say though, I want to say that some of my closest friends in the industry are men. And this is not all men. It does happen, but there are many male photographers that I adore, that are close friends of mine. Some are very supportive of Girls Who Click. The younger photographers in particularly they're changing, and that's so amazing to see. But it's not all men, of course.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
not
No, you're
at
not
all.
getting out your big brush and tiring us all. But I think what's really important, and a big step, is also men calling this stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
We need to use our voice as well. More so than ever. So yeah, it's great. And look, we will put links to Girls Who Click in the write up on your podcast page on my site, and for those of you who don't know about it, go and check it out, because I discovered it when I interviewed Corinne a few years ago, and it's great keeping up to date with that. And actually, another thing I was thinking about with you setting that up is, we've talked about the money side of things, and how hard it is spinning all these plates, is then going into, another huge project and setting up an NGO. By any stretch, that is a lot of work. And
Mm-hmm.
particularly when most wildlife photographers are just about keeping their nose above water, so you've managed to
Right.
sustain that, which is really great. And are you like, in terms of percentage of your time, are you still heavily involved? Has it got kind of an energy of its own now?
I'm definitely still heavily involved. I'm the executive director, but we have a chief operating officer, Margaret, who's part time and she's paid. Everything I do is volunteer. She's a paid staff member, and she's definitely at the helm. Like she's running the ship. And I still have duties that I do as the executive director, and I'm the board president as well. So I have duties there. But Margaret is like integral to our work now. She's
Mm.
incredible. So yeah, we've been able to get our funding to a level where we can hire a couple people, which is great. We've got another gal that works for us and does social media, because otherwise there's no way I could do it. In the beginning, I was doing a lot before we had any money. But luckily, we've been able to make enough in donations that we can have those people running it essentially.
Yeah, and I was also interested in, kind of reaching out. How do you reach out to disenfranchised kids, underprivileged kids? Because of course, as soon as you start this business, it's just expense, and also those who, we touched on it a moment ago, about kids not being, connected to nature, like
Yeah,
perhaps you and I were when we were growing up. And when I interviewed Chris Packham last year, he talked about that, and he mentioned that we are concerned with species going extinct. The young British naturalist is also in danger of going extinct. And is that kind of your experience in the States too?
100%. Like I always tell people, I think the greatest threat to our planet is the disconnect that our younger generations have with nature, way more than climate change, way more than any threat. That is just such a deal breaker. And I think, going back to Girls Who Click, one of our things has always been trying to make our programs accessible to anyone. And so what we'll do is our workshops are always whatever you can do with an SLR, you can do with a smartphone or an iPad. And so we find that about 50% of our girls will come to a workshop with a smartphone or an iPad and not an SLR. So like, some will bring like their grandpa's SLR or their dad's SLR, but most of the time we have a lot of girls coming with smartphones. The other thing, too, that means a lot to us is diversity. So, our ambassador program, we have over 50% diversity. That's not easy.
No.
This is not something that just happened. We actually had to do a lot of work to find girls that are from diverse backgrounds. We worked with a lot of other nonprofits to try to find women out there that were from different places in the world or in the United States, different communities. And so what we're really proud of is that 50% diversity, and we're just going to try to get that up and up. And when I say diverse, I mean race, I mean culture, I mean LGBTQ. And so that's something that we really, really believe in because let's face it, nature photography is white male dominated, right? And so we're trying to, our primary mission is getting more women into this. But what's also really important to us is that those women are
Yeah,
diverse,
sure.
not all white.
I can totally understand that. I just finished. I don't know if you listened to the Nice White Parents podcast. If you,
No, I'm going to have to listen to it.
oh my goodness! I mean, you talk about it being difficult. It's a 5-part series. I listened to it last year, and I just recently listened to it again because I'm kind of fascinated with this stuff. But it's all about the school system. It's set in New York. It's all about the public school system, and
Mhm.
and I mean, it's a huge, amazing piece of journalism by this woman. I forgot her name, but it talks about this effort that's been going on since the 50s to try and get schools more diverse, and white parents wanting that as an ideal but not really wanting it in practice, and just how hard it
Yeah,
is to make changes
yeah,
to make these schools more diverse. Yeah, you got to check it out. It's I'm sure a lot of it will resonate with you. It's amazing.
I will definitely watch that or listen to it. Yeah.
Cool. Look, there's so much more I want to talk to you about. And we've been talking for over an hour now already. But you've got such a rich career, not just photograph. It's funny, so often with these podcasts, we end up like not really talking much about photography. Um, But yeah, you've got a relatively new book out called New on Earth.
Yeah.
So let's talk about it and let's get people excited about it and buying it. And as a publisher of 4 books, I know that you definitely don't do books for the money, but they're a great
Yeah.
way of showcasing work and
Yeah.
particularly current work. So yeah,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
should also add that this is your 21st book, which is one hell of an achievement.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I books are something that I love books, especially photo books. I always have since I was a kid. So for me, having books is something that I'm super, super proud of. Most of my books are kids' books, which I'm also proud of because I see, each book that I do, I take great care in it because I feel like that's going to make an impression on a young mind, very much the same way that my books that I had that I treasured as a kid did. And then, New on Earth is different. It's one of my 3 adult books. It's so funny when I say adult books, people always are like, "What are you?" Like,
You put
well,
some
no, on the
put,
side, I
you
do
could put some of
one
your nipple pictures in there, right?
but I'm like trying to differentiate that between the kids books because it's so funny. People they just assume New on Earth is a kids book. I've had people buy New on Earth and be like, "I was going to give it to my grandchild, but it looks a little mature." I'm like, "Yeah, it's an adult book." Like, but um, anyway, so it's you talk about adversity. This is one we tried to get it published. I think for 6 years, my agent
Wow.
and I. Yeah, and it got rejected by quite a few publishers, and then there were publishers that we had one publisher, I won't say name, but a big publisher that was very interested, and they wanted to call the baby, like when we referred to when I was writing captions for these baby animals, I will often say he or she. I usually don't do a lot of it. Sometimes I do it, but I don't do a lot of it. And this publisher said no, it has to be it. I'm like, again, what decade are we living in? Because we don't call animals it very much anymore, especially in this kind of book. But anyway, we found a publisher that is just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful publisher. They publish all these gorgeous art books and photo
Oh
books.
wow.
Yeah, they're called Mandala Earthware, and it's a branch of Insight. And I'm really proud of it. It's my life's work so far. So it's just a compilation of all my photos of baby animals in the wild from all over the world, with extended captions and an introduction by me. And then the thing I'm most proud of is that 30% of the royalties go to Wildlife Conservation Network (WCN). And this is something I do with all my books. And in fact, it's a huge part of me running a business. I do it with my photo tours, my prints, and my books. And over the years, I've managed to raise $200,000 for various
Wow.
conservation.
That's amazing.
And that's just like the direct sales, So I'm really proud of that, and I'll continue to do that. People always talk about like, well, how do you do that? Like, how do you afford to do it? And I just chalk it up as like a cost of doing business. Like some businesses have ad budgets. I have a donation budget, and
Sure.
it's just a part of like every project going forward. And so this one is the people that are getting money from from New on Earth is Wildlife Conservation Network, and they do programs all over the world.
That's so
So yeah,
cool. That sounds really
yeah,
exciting. I'm glad I learned about
yeah.
it. And actually, you kind of answered, my next question was, what what are your experiences of conservation success stories as a wildlife photographer? And you're a walking one because you've personally donated or raised that kind of
Well,
money.
and
It's great.
I sort of personally have donated it, but there's no way that I could do it without the people buying my books and buying my prints, right? So in the end, it's like the consumers. It's still
Sure.
going back to consumers and going to that idea that as consumers we have choices and we can make a difference, right? And I think that for me, I've always been really into raising awareness, right? And I do that with my social media in any way that I can in my books and my articles, whatever I can do, but I also wanted to take it a step further where, and I'm not taking away from the value of awareness because I think it's incredibly valuable. But there have been times in my life where I've wondered how much of a difference is my awareness really making? And what's really nice about raising money is that you can't argue with that, right? That's like direct impact, especially if you choose where you are going to put it wisely, which I do. That that's going to make a difference. And so at the end of the day, that's one of the things I'm most proud of is that, I've been able to do that. And it actually hasn't been that hard. It really hasn't. It's just been like, once you get into that mindset of like, okay, 30% of that's going to go here and 30%, and sometimes it's 15%, but, depending on what your expenses are. But once you get into that mindset of, there's always a certain amount that's going to go, it's actually really easy to just get in the flow of that.
It
It's
just
almost like paying taxes
Yeah, it
in
just
a way.
becomes part of the spreadsheet, doesn't it? You've
Yeah.
got like the printing costs, the production costs, the
Yeah.
donation, and yeah,
Yeah.
like you say, when you set that up early, it's then easier to deal with. It's not like suddenly you've just got to take away this money. It's actually
Yeah.
this is integral to the book's quality, the ethical side. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that sounds really awesome. So
And I think we sometimes, as humans, we think I have to be financially viable before I donate. That's so not true. I started actually raising money for organizations before I paid off my credit card debt. Like, and during the time I was paying off my credit card during that whole 12 years.
yeah,
And so I don't think we need to be out of debt in order to donate money or raise money. I see this as money I never had. I
sure.
know some people are like, you'd have that, but I see it as money I never had in my pocket.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally get that. And I was just thinking that if we all took that attitude, then there's basically no wildlife photographer would ever donate anything because probably all
Correct.
all of them are in debt.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah. That's why, like, when photographers, when they do raise money, I'm always like, that's amazing because guaranteed they have some financial hardship, right?
My
None
goodness.
of us are living large.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I work with a business advisor here. I've been with for like 15 years, and
Yeah.
she always talks about spreadsheets. And her phrase is that's the bucket of cold water approach, right? When you do a spreadsheet, and I'm doing one now for a book I'm working on, and it's just brutal when you look at the potential sales, and then you take off like the storage and the printing cost and the
Yeah.
production and everything else.
Yeah.
um yeah, and then of course and the donations, you think, well,
Yeah.
it's look, let's just view that as it's set aside, it's doing good, it's actually directly contributing, because well, frankly, we don't have enough time. Any little bit, like you say, hard-earned cash, these organizations need it. They're on the ground, they're doing really, really good work. So let's support it. And if you can help
Yeah.
locally, then that's definitely a success, and it's progress.
Yeah. And I think support each other's projects that are raising money, right? Like that's really important too for us
Mm,
as a community to, if someone has a project that's raising money for a conservation cause,
yeah,
share it.
yeah,
Or buy the book as a colleague, right? As part of the community support, I think
a
is
100%, yeah. And like you say, you're talking about a life's work. Well, I mean, I can't wait to get my hands on it. And again, we'll put links in so people can
oh, thank
buy this
you.
book, which will be great. And actually, that you mentioning supporting each other, you had a great subject which we didn't talk about at length, at any length at all when we started our conversation, was about what annoys you most about being in this
Oh,
industry. And
yeah.
yeah, you touched on the how isolating and lonely it can be at times. And
Yeah.
yeah, it'd be good
Yeah.
and sad to hear this part.
Yeah, I mean, I spend a huge amount of time alone, which is ironic because I'm quite social. I'm not an introvert at all. I do, I live alone and I'm happy by myself. I'm very comfortable by myself, but I also really love people and the human connection. Obviously, I love the animal connection too, but the human connection is something that's incredibly important to me. And this job is hard for that, especially my kind of job, which is traveling many months of the year. And I remember earlier in my career, I was traveling 10 months a year. And, you're on the road 10 months a year, and that's like really terrible for any of your human relationships, family, friends, romantic. You're not really dateable when you're traveling 10 months a year. Or if somebody does want to date you, it's a little suspicious, right? So it's very difficult, I think, to have a personal life in this job and to maintain balance. And I know I mentioned it earlier in our conversation, but I did, at one point in my career, I looked at myself and it was like, okay, I've been at this about 10 years and I'm a workaholic. My personal life is pretty in shambles, like, and I was drinking too much. I was unhealthy. I had insomnia. I was working 16-hour days. And it became, when I was younger, I had the strength to get through those days. But then, around the age of 30, it became completely obvious that my body and my mind were suffering because I was pushing it too hard. I remember a year where I did 10 months. I went to Antarctica. It was my second expedition. And I remember being at Salisbury Plain and looking out and having absolutely no inspiration. I was there in one of the most amazing places on earth. I could barely pick up my camera because I was so exhausted I was burned out. I was so burned out. And so I made these radical changes in my life over a period of 4 or 5 years where I really tried. I did a lot of spiritual work, a lot of soul searching, trying to find work-life balance. I became sober. I just completely changed my life. And I definitely am a much happier person because of it. And now what I will do is I will put limits on the amount of travel I can do so that I can have a good personal life, a good home life. And I think if we don't do that, it's very easy for us to get sort of sucked into this thing where this career becomes everything and we become completely burned out and we become very isolated and lonely. And that's for me, that's been the hardest part about this job.
Yeah, I completely understand that. And it's it's funny you mentioned that. Obviously we have no problems connecting with animals, and I don't like what people are doing to the planet, but I do like people. I do like those connections.
Yeah.
But yeah, we talked a lot about your past, and it's been really great, and I really thank you for your honesty and openness about it all, and your kind of raw account, and kind of amazing and sort of tough journey. But what about the future? What do you think about, and do you ever think about what you'd like to do in 5, 10, 15 years with your photography, with your work?
I did. I actually about 2 years ago, I took my bucket list. I have like this inspiration board where I have visuals up there of various different baby animals that I haven't worked on that I want to work on. And then I had a list going. And what I decided to do is I created this, like, what I call it, like my nerd calendar. And it's this wall-sized calendar of any month in the year and the animals that give birth in that month that are on my bucket list. And so I could, like, if I have a hole in March, I point at March and it's like, okay, all these animals are giving birth in March. And it's incredibly inspirational. There's 72 projects on that list. And so, like, it's freaking never ending. I mean, it really, at the moment, I think I'm about to embark on a baby elephant project, which is likely to take about 3 years of my time. But yeah, it is never ending. And that's what's so inspiring about this, right? We're losing a lot on this planet, but we also have a lot left that we still have. And that list just goes on. And if you love this job, the list is just never ending, which is really inspiring.
That's great. I think I've got a whole list of things that I suppose in the short term need to do. And I just find it just causes me anxiety. So the idea of like, oh my goodness, I've got to like shoot all of these baby animals, and probably some of them are really rare and really hard to get to. It actually, for you, it's not, oh my God, I got to do this. It's like, right, oh my God, I got to get out there and do this because we don't have enough time.
I did have a little moment of anxiety when I got to the 72. I was like, wait a minute, how long am I going to live? Am I going to have enough time to get them all?
I know it's kind of scary when you get into your 40s. Where I've been photographing at this cemetery this year, and it's really beautiful. It's overgrown and it's ancient. There are people in there from the 1800s, and they've just announced this big landscaping project that they're going to do. And I'd got in touch with the CEO of this place saying, hey, look, is anybody going to document this? I'm around working with you and, just looking for work opportunities and sticking my neck out. And he said, well, actually, we haven't thought about that, but this is a 25-year project anyway, so it's not going to happen like that quickly. And then I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to be like 45 soon. So I'll be 70, when that project, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, that I remember 25 years ago pretty well, like as an adult, as a 20-year-old, and to think that then leap leapfrogging to when you're 70. Wow, it is kind of scary. But I think going back to and kind of ending on a high is that the experience is what it's about. And you're talking about these projects, and of course they're challenging, and you have to deal with the extra issue of sexism, and hopefully by the time you're 70, Jesus Christ, God forbid, hopefully we'll be in a better place by then. But then there's the financial side and everything else, but I think always what's really important is just coming back to the passion and the joy of why you do it.
Oh yeah, and connecting with these wild animals and observing them and being privileged enough to be in their presence is just, it's mind-boggling that we get to do this for a job, as hard as it can be at times, right? I mean, it's such a joy.
Completely. Yeah, it really is. Suzi, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, getting to meet you from the other side of the world. And well, look, let's keep the conversation going. It'd be great to get you back on, maybe next year and hear what else you've been up to. And I'll put, like I said, all the links of the stuff that we've talked about, all your social media handles in the page, and we'll get this out there to as many people as possible. What a great story so far. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you so much to Suzi. So generous of spirit to share so much, and all the trials and tribulations that surround this very strange career. I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. I feel so fortunate to get to speak to so many great photographers on here. And Suzi's right up there among my favorites. So thanks for listening. Stay tuned for next year. I've got some great guests lined up, and hopefully it'll be a little bit more consistent than 2021. Have a great Christmas. Have a very happy new year. Please share this around. It's great to get new listeners, new followers. Have a great Christmas and a very happy new year. And I'll see you in 2022.